Judge Stephen Breyer thought humiliating Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett would be easy. When she began laying out her case on voting rights, he let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed through the marble halls of the courthouse. The 85-year-old former justice looked down on the 42-year-old black congresswoman like she was a rookie playing make-believe in his courtroom. But what Jasmine Crockett said next didn't just quiet the laughter, it froze the room. Suddenly, the man who had spent decades commanding respect sat in silence, staring at his hands, unable to look her in the eye. The tension was so sharp you could almost hear it crack. Security guards stopped pacing. Court reporters forgot to type. Even the steady rhythm of the stenographer's machine fell silent. Everyone in that room realized they were witnessing something rare, history being written right in front of them. Before we get into how this David and Goliath showdown played out, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss more stories of people standing tall against the establishment. Moments like this prove that preparation and courage can bring even the most arrogant giants to their knees. What was supposed to be a simple hearing about voting rights turned into a masterclass in handling disrespect with calm, precision, and power. Civil rights leaders had filled the gallery. Law students skipped classes just to watch. Local activists who had spent years fighting voter suppression packed the back rows. None of them expected to see a sitting member of Congress systematically dismantle the towering reputation of a judicial legend, armed with nothing but facts and relentless determination. By the first recess, whispers were spreading through the courthouse. Clerks gossiped by the elevators. Bailiffs texted friends in other rooms. Even the janitorial staff sensed something extraordinary was unfolding in Courtroom 7. By the time it ended, everyone in that room understood they had just witnessed a moment that would redefine how people think about power, respect, and accountability in America's courts. To understand why this clash sent shockwaves, you need to know who these two people are, and why their face-off symbolizes everything broken about the way young leaders, especially women of color, are treated by the old guard. Jasmine Crockett was never supposed to make it here. She grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Texas, the daughter of a single mother juggling 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. While other kids were outside playing, Jasmine was in the library, teaching herself that education was a ticket to something better. She worked her way through law school, waiting tables on weekends, tutoring students to pay for books, even mopping classroom floors at night in the very building where she studied by day. She knows what it feels like to walk into rooms where people assume you don't belong and to prove, again and again, that you do. After graduating near the top of her class, she became a civil rights attorney. At first, even her own clients doubted her. Too young, they thought, too inexperienced. But she silenced every critic by outworking everyone else, digging deeper into case law, finding precedents other attorneys had overlooked, and winning case after case. Over the years, she defended workers facing discrimination, students denied equal opportunities, and families targeted by predatory lenders. Lawyers began to fear her case files more than her courtroom arguments, because they knew how devastatingly prepared she always was. When she ran for Congress, she promised to bring that same grit and fearlessness to Washington, and to never be intimidated by people who use their power as a shield from accountability. Judge Stephen Breyer, by contrast, is the embodiment of the legal establishment. At 85, after nearly 3 decades on the nation's highest court, he walks into every room expecting deference. His words are usually treated as gospel. His laughter, a sign that someone else has said something foolish. The stakes of this hearing couldn't have been higher. Crockett was presenting evidence of voter suppression in Texas, how new laws were quietly stripping the ballot from poor and minority communities. If she could persuade this panel of judges, including Breyer, it could restore voting rights for hundreds of thousands of people. If she failed, those communities could be silenced for years to come. The courtroom was overflowing. Civil rights leaders, some of whom had marched with Dr. King, sat shoulder to shoulder in the front row, watching a new generation take the fight forward. Legal reporters had cameras ready, sensing this could be more than a routine hearing. Law students from across the state skipped classes, desperate to witness what their professors had already called a potentially landmark case. Everyone in that room knew this case could change everything, or nothing, depending on whether the judges, especially Judge Breyer, were willing to take a young black congresswoman seriously. The air in the courtroom practically buzzed with tension. Seasoned court observers could feel it. The energy was sharper, heavier than usual. Normally, Hearings like this unfolded with quiet decorum, almost predictable in their formality. But not today. Today felt volatile, like something could ignite at any moment. Judge Breyer had already tipped his hand that morning, and it wasn't flattering. When the first lawyer, a silver-haired veteran in a bespoke suit, took the podium to drone on about procedural technicalities, Breyer leaned in attentively, asking measured, thoughtful questions as though savoring an intellectual sparring match. The second attorney, another well-connected insider, received the same courtesy, respectful nods, engaged debate, and polite laughter over subtle legal points. Then it was Jasmine Crockett's turn, and the atmosphere shifted like someone had flipped a breaker. Suddenly, Breyer was glancing at his watch, not subtly, but in the exaggerated way of a man wanting everyone to notice. He leaned toward the judge beside him, whispering audibly while she delivered her opening. He shuffled papers unnecessarily, the crinkle of each page a deliberate interruption. His message couldn't have been clearer. You don't belong here. Your words don't matter. But what Judge Breyer didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Jasmine Crockett had been training for this exact moment for years. She knew every judge on that panel, their histories, their habits, their blind spots. She had rehearsed a statement until it was second nature, anticipating every question, every interruption. And she had done the one thing no one else thought to do. She had combed through decades of Breyer's rulings, finding the patterns, the inconsistencies, the weak points that would matter most a day. When Crockett walked up to that podium, the room tightened. Breyer didn't even glance up from his stack of papers. For anyone else, that might have felt like typical arrogance from an aging powerhouse. But this wasn't casual distraction. This was calculated disrespect. The kind courtroom veterans recognized immediately. She began anyway, her voice steady, ringing clear through the chamber. Your Honor, I'm here to present evidence of systemic voter suppression affecting more than 400,000 citizens in my district. That was when Breyer finally looked up, his face wearing the same bored, mildly annoyed expression someone might give a telemarketer interrupting dinner. Congresswoman Crockett, he said, voice dripping with condescension. I'm sure you mean well, but haven't we heard these claims before? Don't you think you're being a bit dramatic? The word dramatic landed like a slap. Everyone in the room understood the subtext. It wasn't about her delivery. It was the same coded dismissal women like Crockett had heard their whole lives. Emotional, irrational, out of their depth. Some people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Even a few of Breyer's colleagues looked away, embarrassed. But Crockett didn't flinch. She'd been here before, maybe not in this courtroom, but in this moment, facing men who believed age, reputation, or power gave them the right to wave her off. Your Honor, she continued, unfazed, I have documented evidence. And that's when it happened. The laugh, not a polite chuckle, not even a sharp scoff. A full, booming laugh that echoed off the marble walls, bouncing through the silent chamber. Congresswoman, Breyer said, savoring the words, I've been reading legal documents since before you were born. I think I can decide what counts as valid evidence. The room froze. Court reporters' fingers stalled on their keyboards. Security guards stopped shifting in the back. Even the other judges looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting anywhere but at the exchange unfolding in front of them. For a beat, Crockett said nothing. She let the laugh die out, let the weight of the silence settle in. And when she finally spoke, her voice was steel. Did I say something amusing, Your Honor? Breyer smirked. It's just that you young politicians always think you've discovered some great injustice that the rest of us somehow missed. But the law is the law. It doesn't change just because you want it to. That was the moment the temperature in the room shifted. Crockett's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with precision, the sharp focus of an attorney who had just found the crack in the wall she'd been looking for. The law doesn't change because I want it to, she repeated, her tone quiet but cutting. Is that your position, Your Honor? Of course, Breyer said, waving her off. The Constitution means what it means. These voting laws you're complaining about are perfectly legal. Just because voting isn't as convenient as ordering coffee doesn't make them discriminatory. Now the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. One of the other judges shifted in his seat, nervously clearing his throat, as if to step in and calm things down. But Crockett didn't budge. She raised a calm, almost dismissive hand. "No," she said evenly. "Let's not interrupt. I want to make sure I fully understand Judge Breyer's position." Her gaze locked on him, unwavering. "You're saying the law never changes because of what politicians want. Is that correct?" Breyer leaned back in his chair, arrogance dripping from every word. "Obviously," he scoffed. "That's how the system works, Congresswoman. Maybe they didn't teach you that in whatever law school you managed to scrape through." The insult was sharp, but Crockett absorbed it without a flinch. She tilted her head slightly, her voice calm, almost curious. "I see," she said softly. "So, in all your years on the bench, on the nation's highest court, no less, you never once reconsidered your interpretation of the law, never shifted your position, never adapted to new evidence or evolving contexts." "I applied the law as written," Breyer snapped, chin raised in defiance. "I didn't legislate from a bench like some judges do." "Interesting," Crockett replied, her tone changing just enough to make every lawyer in the gallery sit up straighter. There was something dangerous there now, the quiet edge of a predator who knows the endgame is in sight. "So, you were never swayed by politics. Your rulings were always about principle, never about convenience. That's what you're saying." Breyer's chest puffed up with pride. "That's right. My record speaks for itself. I was known for my consistency and my respect for precedent." And that's when Jasmine Crockett smiled. Not a warm smile, but the cold, razor-sharp grin of someone who's about to deliver checkmate. "I'm glad you mentioned your record, Your Honor," she said, reaching slowly into a briefcase, "because I took the liberty of reviewing it." The room went still. What followed would become the stuff of legal legend. Crockett pulled out a thick folder, her voice calm and deliberate as she flipped it open. "In 1995, in Henderson v. State Board of Elections, you wrote the majority opinion striking down a voter ID law because, and I quote, such requirement placed an undue burden on citizens' fundamental right to vote." A ripple of surprise ran through the room. "But in 2013, Crockett continued, her tone unflinching, "in Crawford v. Marion County, you upheld a nearly identical law, calling those same requirements reasonable safeguards." Breyer's face flushed crimson. Those were completely different cases. "Were they?" Crockett cut in, her voice sharp as glass. "Because I've read both opinions. The laws were nearly identical. Your Honor, the only thing that changed was the political climate." The gallery murmured. Reporters leaned forward. Even the other judges looked rattled. "And that's not all," Crockett pressed, pulling another document from the folder. "In 2001, you ruled that reducing polling locations disproportionately harmed minority voters. But in 2016, when 200 polling sites in predominantly minority neighborhoods were closed, you called it administratively necessary." The silence was deafening now. "You just told me," Crockett said, her voice ringing through the chamber, "that the law doesn't bend to politics. But your own record shows that your interpretation of the law bends every time it's politically convenient, always in ways that make it harder for poor people and people of color to vote." Breyer sputtered, his words tangled. You're taking those rulings out of context." "Then let's talk about context," Crockett shot back, slamming another file onto the podium. "In 2008, you wrote that early voting was essential to democratic participation. But in 2020, you upheld restrictions on early voting, calling it administratively burdensome. What changed, Judge? Did early voting stop being essential, or did the demographics of early voters change in a way that made you uncomfortable?" The gallery erupted in hushed whispers. Even the security guards froze, uncertain whether to intervene. And then came the final blow. Crockett reached for one last document, her voice cool and steady. "But this," she said, holding up the paper, "this is my favorite. In 2019, in Thompson v. State Legislature, you wrote, beautifully, I might add, that the right to vote is a cornerstone of our democracy, and any law that makes it harder for citizens to exercise that right must be subject to the strictest scrutiny." She let the words hang in the air like a verdict, but Breyer's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. "That was quite an eloquent statement, Your Honor," Crockett said evenly. "Truly inspiring words. The problem, though, is that those words appeared in a case protecting the voting rights of wealthy suburban neighborhoods. When the same restrictions targeted urban districts, largely black and Latino communities, you upheld them every single time. The room went silent. You could almost hear the hum of the lights. The room went silent. You could almost hear the hum of the lights. Breyer sat frozen, looking like he wished he could vanish into the bench, but Crockett wasn't done. She leaned in, her tone measured but razor-sharp. "So let me ask you again," she continued. "You claim the law doesn't shift with politics. Yet your record, your own record, shows a very different story. When it's affluent voters, their right to vote is untouchable. But when it's working-class or minority voters, suddenly, their rights on administrative burden the state is justified in regulating." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to an intense whisper that somehow filled the entire courtroom. "You laughed at me when I walked in here. You dismissed my evidence without even looking at it. You mocked my education and implied I didn't belong here. But here's the truth. Your Honor, I'm not the one whose judicial record collapses under the weight of its own contradictions." The silence that followed was suffocating. Breyer's face had drained of color, his hands trembling on the armrests. The confident, untouchable judge who had strutted into the hearing now looked like a man staring into the wreckage of his own reputation. The other judges exchanged stunned glances, some wide-eyed, others betraying a hint of satisfaction. From the gallery, civil rights leaders looked at each other in awe. Law students were scribbling furiously, aware they were watching a masterclass in legal advocacy that would be studied for years. Even the court reporters were struggling to keep pace, their fingers flying across their keyboards. Then Crockett straightened, her tone returning to a calm, commanding authority. "Now," she said, "shall we review my evidence on voter suppression in Texas? Or would you prefer to keep underestimating the black woman who apparently knows your judicial history better than you do?" The challenge lingered in the air. Breyer opened his mouth, but no words came. The man who had spent decades crafting sharp opinions and cutting remarks sat speechless, stripped of his usual swagger, left with nothing but the quiet humiliation of being bested by unflinching truth. What followed was nothing short of remarkable. When the recess ended, the same judge who had mocked her at the start now listened intently, scribbled notes, and asked measured, respectful questions. The condescending smirk was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. By the time the hearing concluded 2 hours later, Breyer did something nobody in that courtroom expected. He walked to Crockett's table, lowered his voice, and said, "Congresswoman, I owe you an apology. Your research was impeccable. Your point, well taken." Crockett met his eyes, calm and composed. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. "I hope we can work together to ensure every citizen's right to vote is protected." Within hours, the moment exploded across social media. Court reporters posted their first-hand accounts, law students shared transcripts, and legal blogs lit up. Across the country, people were talking about what had just happened, and about the young congresswoman who had dismantled one of the most powerful judges in the nation, using nothing but the truth and an unshakable command of the law professor Sarah Chen from Columbia Law School tweeted, "Just heard about the Crockett-Breyer exchange. This is what happens when someone actually does their homework. Brilliant legal advocacy." The Harvard Law Review even published an emergency blog post titled "When Preparation Meets Prejudice, the Art of a Legal Takedown," praising Congresswoman Crockett's systematic dismantling of Judge Breyer's judicial inconsistencies as advocacy at its finest. They wrote, "She didn't just win an argument, she exposed decades of judicial double standards." Legal podcasts devoted entire episodes to analyzing the exchange. Former prosecutor Michael Rodriguez explained on the popular Legal Eagles podcast, "This wasn't just about voting rights. This was about the importance of holding judges accountable for their decisions, even former justices who think they are above criticism." The hashtag #CrockettVSBreyer began trending within 6 hours, sparking a social media explosion that dominated news cycles for weeks. Video clips of the key moments racked up millions of views. The most popular clip featured Crockett's sharp line, "I'm not the one whose judicial record shows complete lack of consistency and principle," followed by 30 seconds of Breyer's stunned silence. Social media users ran wild with creative edits. TikTok showing a split screen of Breyer's confident smirk at the start versus his defeated expression at the end, set to dramatic music, gained over 5 million views. Law students and young lawyers embrace Crockett as a hero. One viral TikTok reenacted Crockett's speech with the caption, "When you actually read the assigned cases and catch a professor in a contradiction," while another showed a young black woman in a law library captioned, "Preparing for my Crockett moment." Memes mock Breyer relentlessly, with before and after comparisons and comedic highlight reels of his facial expressions during the hearing. Political commentary poured in from both sides of the aisle. Conservative legal analyst Robert Hayes admitted, "I disagree with Congresswoman Crockett on most policy issues, but her legal research here was absolutely flawless." Breyer got exposed because he thought his reputation would protect him from actual scrutiny. That's not how the law works. Progressive activist Maya Patel tweeted, "This is why representation matters." Jasmine Crockett brought receipts that no one else bothered to collect. She held power accountable in a way we rarely see. She didn't just win an argument, she documented a pattern of bias that needed to be exposed. The impact went far beyond social media. Law students launched judicial record review projects to systematically analyze the voting patterns of federal judges, while 3 law schools announced new courses on judicial advocacy and accountability, using Crockett's takedown as a case study. Civil rights organizations seized on the moment. The National Voting Rights Coalition issued a statement praising Crockett for showing that judicial bias is not just about personal prejudice, it's about systemic patterns that can be documented and challenged. Even in the courtroom, the moment had lasting effects. The panel of judges, perhaps chastened by the exposure of Breyer's inconsistencies, ruled in Crockett's favor, striking down the Texas voting restrictions and restoring access to over 400,000 voters. For Stephen Breyer, the experience was humbling. In a rare move, he published an op-ed in a major legal journal titled "The Importance of Consistent Principles in Judicial Decision-Making," admitting that the exchange had forced me to examine patterns in my own judicial decisions that I had not previously recognized. He began teaching courses on judicial self-reflection and bias recognition at 3 law schools and, according to close sources, spent weeks combing through his old decisions to note inconsistencies, like watching someone see themselves clearly for the first time, a former clerk said. For Jasmine Crockett, the confrontation marked a turning point. Speaking requests flooded in from law schools, civil rights organizations, and political groups nationwide. Legal publications profiled her approach to advocacy, highlighting her belief that accountability requires preparation. You can't just point out bias, you have to document it systematically. Her congressional colleagues took notice, appointing her to the House Judiciary Committee. Young women of color in law schools began reaching out to her for mentorship, prompting her to launch monthly virtual sessions called Preparation Meets Opportunity, where she teaches aspiring lawyers how to research judicial records, build systematic arguments, and stay composed under pressure. Crockett's mentorship sessions quickly became legendary in legal education cycles. Law students would log in hours early just to secure a virtual seat. Recordings of these sessions were soon incorporated into law school curricula, becoming required viewing in courses focused on research and advocacy. Professors began noticing a clear shift. Students who participated in Crockett sessions demonstrated stronger research skills, sharper analytical thinking, and greater confidence in mock trials and real courtrooms. "She's teaching us more than just legal research," explained Maria Rodriguez, a third-year law student. "She's teaching us how to turn preparation into power, how to use facts as weapons against prejudice. When professors or classmates try to dismiss our ideas, we remember Crockett's advice, let the research speak for itself." But the impact didn't stop at law schools. Young professionals in fields like business, tech, and journalism began adopting what came to be known as the Crockett method, a disciplined approach built on thorough preparation, systematic documentation, and calm, fact-based communication, especially in situations involving bias or unfair treatment. Business schools even began analyzing her confrontation with Judge Breyer as a case study in strategic communication. MBA students dissected how she built her argument, curated her evidence, and controlled the emotional dynamics of the exchange while keeping her focus on the ultimate goal. The Crockett-Breyer exchange soon became required viewing across law programs nationwide. It was used to teach everything from advanced legal research to courtroom advocacy to the ethical importance of judicial consistency. Professor David Kim of Georgetown Law summed it up best. This case study shows students that legal arguments aren't just about theory. They're about documenting real-world patterns and using that evidence to demand accountability. Academia took notice in deeper ways. 2. The confrontation sparked a wave of scholarly research into judicial consistency. Legal scholars began publishing papers examining federal judges' voting records of the same types of inconsistencies Crockett had exposed in Breyer's history. Most importantly, her courtroom victory created a ripple effect of real-world change. The restoration of voting access in Texas became a model for legal challenges in other states. Civil rights attorneys began replicating Crockett's methodology to combat voter suppression nationwide. Within 6 months, voter participation in the Texas district affected by the case increased by an astonishing 34%. Community organizers credited both the legal triumph and the inspiration of seeing someone like Crockett stand up to entrenched power. Young people saw that you don't have to accept disrespect from authority figures, said activist Rosa Martinez. If you do your homework and stand up for what's right, you can change things. What started as one judge mocking one congresswoman grew into a symbol of something much larger, the fight against systemic bias and the triumph of preparation and persistence over arrogance and privilege. Legal commentator Jennifer Walsh captured it perfectly. The Crockett-Breyer moment mattered because it proved that accountability is possible. Even the most powerful people can be held responsible if someone is willing to do the work. Today, her story continues to inspire people in every field facing their own David versus Goliath battles. Law student preparing for tough oral arguments rewatch the video for motivation. Community activists researching local officials cite Crockett's techniques as their blueprint. Young professionals dealing with dismissive colleagues take comfort in knowing that documentation and preparation can cut through arrogance. In the end, what happened in that courtroom wasn't just about voting rights or judicial integrity. It was about the transformative power of truth that is thoroughly researched, carefully documented, and fearlessly presented. The deeper lesson from Jasmine Crockett's stunning victory isn't limited to law or politics. It's about how anyone can stand up to those who try to silence or belittle them. Whether it's a meeting where someone talks down to you, a classroom where bias clouds judgment, or any situation where someone's power makes you feel small, Crockett's approach lights the way forward. Prepare meticulously, document carefully, and present your facts calmly, even in the face of intimidation. Think about your own life. How many times have your ideas been dismissed before they were even heard? How often have assumptions about your age, background, gender, or race made others think they knew more than you? Crockett's story reminds us that those moments don't have to end in defeat. The key is preparation. She didn't walk into that courtroom hoping to improvise. She didn't rely on charm or luck. She put in the work, studying Breyer's rulings for hours, finding the patterns, and building an airtight case that no one could ignore. When the time came to defend herself, she relied on facts, not just feelings. Even when Judge Breyer laughed at her, showing clear disrespect, she didn't let anger take over. She didn't lash out or lose her composure. Instead, she stayed calm, leaned on her preparation, and delivered her evidence with precision and confidence. That's a strategy anyone can use when truth needs to confront power. But more than that, her story is about refusing to accept disrespect as normal. Too often, when people in positions of authority belittle us, we start to believe their message, that maybe we don't belong, that maybe we're not good enough, that maybe we should just stay quiet. Crockett refused to believe any of that. When Breyer mocked her, she didn't shrink. When he questioned her credentials, she didn't second-guess herself. Instead, she turned his arrogance into his weakness, using his own record to prove that respect isn't something you demand by status. It's something you earn through consistency, integrity, and principle. So, the next time someone tries to dismiss you based on their assumptions about what you don't know, think of Jasmine Crockett walking into that courtroom armed with evidence and the courage to use it. Remember that careful preparation can defeat prejudice, that solid research can crush arrogance, and that standing up for what's right is always worth the risk. In today's world, where a viral moment can inspire real change, a confrontation is a powerful reminder. The most meaningful moments aren't staged or scripted. They happen when someone underestimated proves everyone wrong, not through theatrics, but through preparation, persistence, and quiet determination. If her story motivates you, To stand up for yourself, to put in the work before facing your critics, or to stop accepting disrespect is something you just have to take. Then share this message. Because in a world where power often tries to silence truth, we need more people willing to do the work and speak up. And who knows, maybe your moment to turn the tables is closer than you think. And when that moment comes, you'll be ready.